September 26, 1371 dawned with deceptive tranquility along the Maritsa River in Thrace, where the largest Serbian army assembled in a generation had established camp on the riverbanks, utterly unaware that nightfall would bring catastrophic disaster that would destroy Serbian military power, kill two of the most powerful nobles in the fragmenting Serbian Empire, and irrevocably establish Ottoman dominance throughout Macedonia and the southern Balkans for centuries to come. King Vukašin and Despot Uglješa, co-ruler of the Serbian Empire alongside the young and ineffectual Emperor Uroš the Weak, had spent months organizing this massive military expedition designed to halt Ottoman expansion before Turkish forces could advance further into Serbian territories, assembling perhaps 60,000 to 70,000 warriors from Serbian lands, allied Bulgarian contingents, and various other Balkan Christian forces who recognized that Ottoman power had grown to threaten all Christian states in the region, and less decisive military action reversed Turkish conquests. His brother Despot Uglješa, a lord of Serbs and one of the most powerful magnates in the crumbling Serbian state, served as co-commander of this enormous host that represented not merely another frontier skirmish, but rather a calculated strategic gamble to destroy Ottoman military capability through overwhelming force before the expanding Turkish state could consolidate its recent conquests and organize the resources necessary for continued expansion into the Serbian heartland. The Serbian army that sprawled across the Maritsa's northern banks represented the culmination of extraordinary mobilization efforts that had drained Serbian territories of fighting men and resources, to assemble forces sufficient to challenge Ottoman military power that had proven so formidable in previous engagements. The warriors who answered Vukašin's summons included the feudal levies that Serbian nobility owed their sovereign, professional soldiers maintained by wealthy magnates, urban militias from Serbian towns, and various allied contingents whose participation reflected shared recognition that Ottoman expansion threatened all Balkan Christian states regardless of their immediate proximity to Turkish-controlled territories. The army's composition demonstrated both the military resources that the Serbian state could still mobilize despite decades of political fragmentation following the death of the powerful emperor Stefan Dušan in 1355, and the fundamental weakness that characterized Serbian political organization, as the assembled forces owed loyalty to diverse nobles and regional powers rather than to any unified Serbian state authority, creating command coordination challenges that would prove catastrophically consequential when the army faced its ultimate test. The strategic context that had prompted this massive Serbian military effort extended far beyond immediate territorial disputes to encompass fundamental questions about whether Christian Balkan states could maintain independence or would inevitably fall under Ottoman suzerainty as the expanding Turkish Empire consolidated control over territories stretching from Anatolia deep into Europe. Sultan Murad I, now in his mid-40s and at the height of his military and political capabilities, had spent the previous decade systematically expanding Ottoman control throughout Thrace and Macedonia, capturing the crucial Byzantine city of Adrianople and transforming it into Edirne, the Ottoman Empire's European capital, defeating Byzantine-Bulgarian coalitions at battles including Sazlı Dere, and establishing vassal relationships with various Balkan Christian rulers who accepted Ottoman suzerainty in exchange for preserving their thrones and territories. The Serbian lands, though not yet directly threatened by Ottoman military operations, faced the reality that continued Turkish expansion would eventually bring Ottoman forces into conflict with Serbian interests, making preemptive military action appear strategically prudent to Serbian leaders who believed that defeating Ottoman forces before they grew even stronger offered better prospects than waiting until Turkish power became overwhelming. King Vukašin's personal motivations for organizing this enormous military expedition combined genuine concern about Ottoman expansion threatening Serbian territories with more immediate political calculations about how military success against the Turks might strengthen his own tenuous position within the fragmented Serbian political landscape. Vukašin had risen to power through a combination of military capability, political cunning, and ruthless elimination of rivals, eventually maneuvering himself into position as co-ruler alongside the weak Emperor Uroš, despite lacking the royal bloodline that traditionally legitimized Serbian sovereignty. His position remained contested by other powerful Serbian nobles, who questioned his authority and who might challenge his rule if his military and political capabilities appeared to weaken. A decisive victory over Ottoman forces would validate Vukašin's leadership, demonstrate his value to the Serbian state, and potentially enable him to consolidate power more effectively than political maneuvering alone could achieve. These personal political stakes, combined with genuine strategic concerns about Ottoman expansion, drove Vukašin's commitment to the military campaign despite the enormous costs and risks that assembling such a massive army necessarily entailed. The intelligence gathering and strategic planning that preceded the Serbian army's advance into Ottoman-controlled Thrace demonstrated both the seriousness with which Serbian leadership approached the campaign and the fundamental limitations that constrained medieval military intelligence. Regardless of how extensive the efforts to gather information about enemy capabilities and dispositions, Serbian scouts and spies had been operating in Ottoman territories for months before the army's departure, attempting to assess Turkish military strength, identify Ottoman defensive positions, and determine optimal routes for Serbian advance into territory that Ottoman forces increasingly controlled. The information these intelligence efforts produced, though fragmentary and sometimes contradictory as medieval intelligence typically was, suggested that Ottoman military forces in the region were not concentrated in overwhelming strength, and that a large, well-led Serbian army might achieve decisive victory if it could bring Ottoman forces to battle, before Turkish commanders could assemble reinforcements from other territories. This intelligence assessment, though not entirely inaccurate, failed to appreciate the speed with which Ottoman commanders could concentrate forces and the tactical sophistication that Turkish military leadership had developed through decades of continuous warfare against diverse opponents. The march route that the Serbian army followed toward the Maritsa River reflected strategic calculations about how to maximize the expedition's prospects for success, while minimizing the risks that inevitably accompanied deep penetration into hostile territory. Vukašin and Uglješa chose to advance through Thrace toward Edirne itself, the Ottoman European capital, calculating that threatening such a strategically crucial city would force Ottoman forces to concentrate for its defense, creating the opportunity for decisive battle that the Serbian campaign sought. The route required the army to cross numerous rivers and to traverse terrain that became increasingly dominated by Ottoman control as the Serbian forces advanced deeper into Turkish-held territory, creating supply and communication challenges that strained the army's logistical capabilities. The decision to establish camp along the Maritsa River, within striking distance of Edirne, but positioned to enable withdrawal if Ottoman forces proved too strong to engage successfully, reflected the Serbian commander's awareness that their army, though massive, operated far from home bases and could not sustain extended operations if Ottoman resistance proved more formidable than anticipated. The Serbian camp established along the Maritsa's banks on September 26 revealed both the professional military competence of some elements within the army and the dangerously casual security practices that characterized the force as a whole, creating vulnerabilities that a sophisticated enemy might exploit with catastrophic consequences. The camp sprawled across extensive territory, necessary to accommodate tens of thousands of warriors and their horses, supplies, and equipment, creating a defensive perimeter too extensive for the available forces to adequately guard every vulnerable point. Some units within the Serbian army, particularly those led by experienced military commanders who understood siege and field warfare's requirements, established proper defensive positions with sentries, prepared withdrawal routes, and maintained combat readiness. Yet other units, perhaps the majority of the army, treated the camp more casually, with warriors celebrating their successful advance into Ottoman territory, consuming alcohol in quantities that impaired combat readiness, and generally failing to maintain the vigilance that military prudence demanded when operating deep in hostile territory. This dangerous complacency, born from confidence in the army's overwhelming numbers and perhaps from underestimation of Ottoman tactical capabilities, created the conditions for disaster that would unfold with shocking speed once darkness fell. Sultan Murad I received intelligence about the massive Serbian army advancing toward Edirne while he was coordinating Ottoman military operations from his capital, and his response demonstrated the tactical sophistication and decisive leadership that had characterized his military career since inheriting the Ottoman throne nearly a decade earlier. The reports reaching Edirne indicated that a Serbian force of unprecedented size, possibly the largest Christian army assembled in the Balkans since the fragmenting Serbian Empire's glory days under Stefan Dušan, was marching through Ottoman-controlled Thrace with apparent intent to either capture Edirne itself or to force Ottoman armies into decisive battle that might reverse Turkish conquests and re-establish Christian dominance in the region. The strategic threat that such a massive force represented was unmistakable, as defeated Serbian hands could undo years of Ottoman expansion, encourage other Christian powers to resist Turkish suzerainty, and potentially force Ottoman withdrawal from European territories that Murad had worked so systematically to conquer and consolidate. Yet the Sultan also recognized that the Serbian army's very size and its deep penetration into Ottoman territory created vulnerabilities that sophisticated tactics might exploit. transforming what appeared to be overwhelming Serbian strength into a weakness that could be turned against the invaders. The military council that Sultan Murad convened to plan Ottoman response to the Serbian threat brought together the most experienced commanders in the Ottoman military establishment. Veterans of countless campaigns who understood both conventional battlefield tactics and the unconventional approaches that might achieve victory when facing numerically superior opponents. The strategic options available to Ottoman forces ranged from defensive approaches that would concentrate Turkish troops in Edirne's fortifications and force Serbian armies to conduct costly siege operations, to more aggressive tactics that would seek battle in open field despite Serbian numerical superiority, to unconventional operations that might exploit Serbian vulnerabilities through surprise attacks or other methods that could achieve disproportionate impact. The military assessment that emerged from these council deliberations recognized that Ottoman forces in the immediate vicinity of Edirne numbered perhaps 15,000 to 25,000 warriors, substantially fewer than the Serbian army, but still representing a significant force if properly employed. The consensus that developed among Murad's commanders favored an aggressive, unconventional approach that would attack the Serbian army before it could either besiege Edirne or withdraw to safer positions, specifically targeting the moment of maximum Serbian vulnerability when the massive army was encamped and unprepared for serious combat operations. The tactical plan that Sultan Murad and his commanders developed for attacking the Serbian encampment reflected both the Ottoman military establishment's institutional experience with diverse combat situations and the specific intelligence about Serbian dispositions that Ottoman scouts had gathered through reconnaissance of the enemy camp. The plan centered on a nighttime assault against the Serbian positions along the Maritsa River, exploiting the darkness to negate Serbian numerical superiority by creating chaos and confusion that would prevent the massive army from organizing effective resistance. The attack would concentrate overwhelming force against specific points in the Serbian defensive perimeter, breaking through into the camp and then spreading devastation through the disorganized Serbian forces before they could rally and bring their superior numbers to bear. The timing of the attack would be carefully chosen to maximize Ottoman advantages, launching when Serbian forces were least prepared for serious combat, when darkness would conceal Ottoman movements and troop strengths, and when the element of complete surprise could create psychological shock that would amplify the physical damage inflicted by Ottoman weapons. This plan, though extraordinarily risky in requiring Ottoman forces to attack an enemy of vastly superior numbers on ground that had not been thoroughly reconnoitered, offered prospects for decisive victory that more conventional approaches could not match. The preparation of Ottoman forces for the nighttime assault involved both the practical military measures necessary for conducting complex operations in darkness and the psychological preparation required to steel warriors for attacking an enemy that outnumbered them by perhaps 3 to 1 or more. The Ottoman commanders organized their forces into strike columns that would approach the Serbian camp from different directions, creating multiple simultaneous penetrations of the defensive perimeter that would divide Serbian defenders' attention and prevent coordinated response to the attacks. The warriors selected for the assault included the most experienced and reliable troops available, soldiers who had demonstrated courage and discipline in previous engagements and who could be trusted to maintain formation and follow orders even in the chaos and confusion that nighttime combat inevitably created. The officers leading these assault columns received detailed briefings about their objectives, their routes of approach to the Serbian camp, and the signals they should watch for to coordinate their attacks and maintain communication with other Ottoman units, despite the darkness and confusion. According to historical analysis presented in The Ottoman Empire, 1300 to 1481 by Colin Imber, this level of tactical planning and organizational sophistication demonstrated how far Ottoman military capabilities had evolved from the relatively simple tribal warfare that had characterized early Turkish expansion, reflecting institutional military development that made Ottoman forces exceptionally formidable opponents. The psychological preparation of Ottoman warriors for the assault incorporated both religious motivations that framed the attack as jihad against Christian enemies of Islam and practical appeals to warriors' self-interest, including promises of plunder from the wealthy Serbian camp and opportunities for advancement that successful participation in such a daring operation would provide. Sultan Murad himself addressed assembled troops before the march toward the Serbian positions, invoking divine favor for their enterprise and emphasizing that a surprise attack against a complacent enemy offered far better prospects for victory than conventional battle, where Serbian numerical superiority would present overwhelming challenges. The warriors who would conduct the assault understood that they faced extraordinary risks. as attacking a force several times their own numbers in darkness across unfamiliar terrain could easily result in catastrophic defeat if Serbian forces detected the approach and organized effective resistance. Yet they also recognized that their Sultan and commanders had consistently led them to victory through tactical innovation and bold action, creating confidence that this latest daring plan might achieve success despite the obvious dangers involved. The approach march that brought Ottoman forces from Edirne to positions near the Serbian camp along the Maritsa River required extraordinary discipline and coordination, as thousands of warriors moved across several miles of terrain in darkness while maintaining formation cohesion and avoiding detection by Serbian sentries who might alert the camp to approaching danger. The Ottoman columns advanced slowly and carefully, with scouts ranging ahead to identify obstacles and to neutralize any Serbian outposts that might discover the approaching Ottoman forces. The coordination required to move multiple columns simultaneously through darkness toward convergence points near the Serbian camp tested Ottoman organizational capabilities and the training that had prepared warriors and officers for complex operations under difficult conditions. The final positioning of Ottoman forces for the assault, achieved in the hours before dawn on September 26, placed strike columns at multiple points around the Serbian camp's perimeter, ready to launch coordinated attacks that would break into the encampment from different directions simultaneously and create the chaos and confusion that the Ottoman tactical plan required for success. The moments before the assault commenced brought final preparations and the psychological intensification that precedes combat, as Ottoman warriors checked weapons and equipment one last time, performed ritual prayers seeking divine protection and favor, and steeled themselves mentally for the violence they would soon unleash and endure. The commanders leading the assault columns watched for the signal that would launch the attack, coordinating their movements to ensure that all columns struck simultaneously and that the element of surprise would be preserved until the moment when Ottoman warriors burst into the Serbian camp. The darkness that still covered the landscape in the hours before dawn provided the concealment that the Ottoman tactical plan required, while also creating challenges for maintaining coordination and communication between dispersed forces preparing to execute synchronized operations. The Ottoman army poised for attack represented the culmination of decades of military development and the embodiment of tactical sophistication that would soon be tested against an enemy whose numerical superiority meant that Ottoman victory required not merely fighting well but achieving perfect execution of a plan that demanded surprise, speed, and sustained violence that would shatter Serbian cohesion before the massive army could organize effective resistance. The Ottoman assault erupted with shocking violence in the pre-dawn darkness of September 26, as thousands of Turkish warriors burst through the Serbian camp's inadequately defended perimeter at multiple points simultaneously, creating instant chaos and confusion among Serbian forces who had been sleeping, celebrating, or maintaining minimal watch with no expectation of serious combat operations. The Serbian sentries positioned around the camp's edges, where they existed at all, were overwhelmed in seconds by Ottoman assault columns whose warriors struck with the precision and ferocity that years of training and combat experience had cultivated, cutting down defenders before they could raise an effective alarm or organize resistance that might have blunted the initial Ottoman penetration. The multiple simultaneous breaches in the Serbian defensive perimeter prevented any coordinated response as different parts of the massive camp came under attack from different directions at the same moment, creating isolated pockets of confused fighting rather than coherent defensive battle lines that might have enabled Serbian numerical superiority to manifest effectively. The darkness that still shrouded the battlefield amplified the assault's psychological impact, as Serbian warriors waking to sounds of combat and screaming men could not assess the scale of the attack, could not distinguish friends from enemies in the darkness, and could not determine whether they faced a minor raid or the catastrophic assault that was actually unfolding. The Ottoman warriors who poured into the Serbian camp through the breached perimeter executed their tactical assignments with devastating effectiveness, spreading through the encampment to maximize chaos and destruction rather than consolidating positions or establishing defensive lines. The assault columns fragmented into smaller units that attacked Serbian contingents still attempting to organize themselves, setting fires that illuminated the carnage while also creating additional panic, and that forced Serbian warriors to choose between fighting Ottoman attackers and fleeing the flames consuming tents and supplies. The Turkish cavalry that accompanied the assault wheeled through the camp, striking at concentrations of Serbian forces, using their mobility to avoid becoming bogged down in sustained combat while inflicting casualties and spreading terror wherever they appeared. The coordination that Ottoman forces maintained despite the darkness and chaos demonstrated the training and discipline that distinguished professional military forces from improvised levies, as Ottoman warriors executed complex tactical maneuvers in conditions that would have reduced less capable forces to disorganized mobs. The Serbian response to the Ottoman assault was fatally hampered by the organizational fragmentation that had characterized the army from its assembly, as different contingents led by different nobles attempted to mount defensive efforts without effective coordination or unified command direction. Some Serbian units, those led by experienced military commanders who maintained combat readiness even in camp and who responded quickly to the alarm, managed to organize defensive formations that resisted Ottoman attacks effectively for periods ranging from minutes to hours, demonstrating that Serbian warriors possessed the courage and capability to fight effectively when properly led and organized. Yet these isolated pockets of effective resistance could not compensate for the broader collapse of Serbian military cohesion, as tens of thousands of warriors scattered across the sprawling encampment found themselves under attack in darkness without a clear understanding of what was happening, without orders from recognized commanders, and without any obvious course of action beyond individual survival. The result was progressive disintegration of the Serbian army as an organized military force, transforming what had been the largest Christian army in the Balkans into a terrified mob whose only shared impulse was escape from the nightmare that the Ottoman attack had created. King Vukašin and Despot Uglješa, the Serbian commanders whose leadership and political authority had assembled this enormous army, faced the horrifying realization that their military gambit had become a catastrophic disaster as they struggled to comprehend the scale of the Ottoman attack and to organize an effective response that might salvage some portion of their forces from destruction. The brothers attempted to rally Serbian warriors around their personal standards, calling for units to form defensive positions that might enable organized withdrawal or even a counterattack that could drive Ottoman forces from the camp. Some warriors responded to these rallying calls, gathering around their lords in defensive formations that temporarily stabilized small sections of the chaotic battlefield. Yet the majority of the Serbian army had already fragmented beyond any possibility of effective command and control. The personal courage that Vukašin and Uglješa displayed in attempting to organize resistance amid the chaos earned them honorable places in subsequent Serbian chronicles. Yet their courage could not overcome the fundamental reality that their army had been caught completely unprepared by an enemy whose tactical sophistication far exceeded what Serbian command planning had anticipated. The progressive Serbian collapse accelerated as warriors who had initially attempted to fight or to organize defensive positions recognized that effective resistance was impossible and that survival required immediate flight from the killing ground that their camp had become. The bridges crossing the Maritsa River became deadly bottlenecks as thousands of fleeing Serbian warriors attempted to escape across the limited crossing points simultaneously, creating crushing crowds where men were trampled or forced into the river by the pressure of those behind them. The river itself became a death trap as Serbian warriors who could not reach the bridges or who were pushed from them attempted to swim across in armor and equipment that dragged many to drowning deaths in the darkness. Ottoman cavalry pursuing fleeing Serbian forces struck at these vulnerable concentrations of humanity attempting to cross the river, inflicting additional casualties on warriors who had already lost all capacity for organized military resistance and who sought only to escape the slaughter. The human tragedy unfolding at the Maritsa's crossing points represented medieval warfare at its most brutal, as military disaster transformed into humanitarian catastrophe with thousands of men dying not in combat but in panic flight, and in the cruel mathematics of how many human bodies could attempt to occupy the same space simultaneously. The deaths of King Vukašin and Despot Uglješa occurred amid the chaos, as the Serbian commanders either perished fighting to cover their army's withdrawal or drowned attempting to cross the Maritsa, along with thousands of their followers, with conflicting historical accounts leaving uncertainty about the precise circumstances of their final moments. Some Serbian chronicles suggest that the brothers died heroically fighting against overwhelming Ottoman numbers, maintaining their positions until killed by enemy warriors who overwhelmed their defensive formations. Other accounts indicate that they perished in the river crossing attempts, either drowned under the weight of their armor or trampled by the thousands of fleeing warriors, creating a deadly crush at the crossing points. The uncertainty about their exact fate matters less than the undeniable reality that both commanders perished in the disaster they had led their army into, leaving the Serbian state without its most powerful leaders at the moment when a political and military crisis demanded capable direction. Their deaths transformed the military catastrophe at Maritsa into a political crisis that would paralyze Serbian response to Ottoman expansion, and that would facilitate Turkish conquest of Serbian territories during subsequent years. The Ottoman pursuit that continued throughout the night and into the following day inflicted casualties that far exceeded what the initial assault had achieved, as Turkish cavalry ranged across the countryside hunting down scattered Serbian survivors who lacked organization, supplies, or any coherent plan beyond immediate survival. The killing continued for hours, after the Serbian camp had been completely overrun, and after organized Serbian resistance had ceased, as Ottoman forces methodically hunted down warriors attempting to escape, and as they encountered groups of survivors too exhausted or disorganized to continue fleeing. The plunder that Ottoman warriors collected from the Serbian camp, including weapons, armor, horses, supplies, and the personal possessions of tens of thousands of warriors, enriched Turkish forces while also demonstrating the scale of the Serbian disaster through the sheer volume of military equipment abandoned or captured. The prisoners taken by Ottoman forces, though fewer than might have been captured in a conventional battle since the chaos of the night attack made systematic prisoner-taking difficult, included Serbian nobles whose ransom value would provide additional financial benefit to the victorious Ottoman army, and whose captivity would further weaken Serbian political and military capabilities. September 27th's dawn illuminated a scene of such complete devastation along the Maritsa River that even the Ottoman victors who had inflicted the carnage stood sobered by the scale of destruction their night attack had achieved. As the rising sun revealed thousands of Serbian dead scattered across the battlefield and floating in the river, abandoned equipment and supplies covering the ground, and the smoldering ruins of what had been a vast military encampment transformed overnight into a graveyard. The casualty estimates that emerge from various historical sources, though inevitably imprecise given medieval record-keeping limitations and the propaganda incentives that encouraged both sides to exaggerate or minimize losses depending on their narrative purposes, consistently indicated that the Serbian army had suffered catastrophic losses, with perhaps 15,000 to 30,000 warriors killed during the night attack and subsequent pursuit, with additional thousands captured or so thoroughly scattered that they never returned to organized military service. The magnitude of these casualties, representing possibly half or more of the enormous army that King Vukašin and Despot Uglješa had assembled, made the Battle of Maritsa one of the most decisive and destructive engagements in Balkan medieval history, comparable in its immediate military impact and its long-term strategic consequences to the greatest battles of the era. The Ottoman casualties suffered during the night attack and pursuit proved remarkably light relative to the scale of the victory achieved, demonstrating how effectively the tactical plan of surprise nighttime assault had enabled a smaller force to destroy a much larger enemy while minimizing its own losses. The Ottoman forces probably suffered casualties numbering in the hundreds rather than thousands, with most losses occurring during the initial assault when some Serbian units mounted effective resistance before being overwhelmed, and during the pursuit when scattered groups of Serbian warriors occasionally turned at bay and fought desperately against their pursuers. The asymmetric casualty ratio that resulted from the night attack, with Serbian losses perhaps 20 or 30 times greater than Ottoman casualties, reflected both the tactical brilliance of Sultan Murad's battle plan and the fundamental effectiveness of surprise as a force multiplier that could enable inferior numbers to achieve victory over superior forces caught unprepared. The relatively modest Ottoman losses meant that Turkish military capability in the region remained essentially intact while Serbian military power had been effectively destroyed, creating strategic consequences that would extend far beyond the immediate battlefield. The immediate aftermath of the battle witnessed Ottoman forces consolidating their victory through systematic exploitation of the Serbian disaster, collecting plunder, securing prisoners, and establishing complete control over the battlefield and surrounding territory. Sultan Murad arrived at the battlefield shortly after the fighting concluded. Surveying the devastation and receiving reports from his commanders about the assault's spectacular success and the remarkably light Ottoman casualties, the Sultan ordered proper burial for Ottoman dead according to Islamic custom, while also directing that Serbian casualties receive adequate burial to prevent disease and to demonstrate the respect for fallen enemies that Islamic military ethics demanded. The collection and distribution of plunder followed established Ottoman procedures that allocated shares to participating warriors, while also directing portions to the imperial treasury and to charitable purposes, creating incentive structures that rewarded military success while also funding state operations and social welfare programs that legitimized Ottoman governance. The political consequences of the Battle of Maritsa began manifesting immediately as news of the catastrophic Serbian defeat spread throughout the Balkans, creating shock and despair among Christian populations who had placed such hope in the massive army that was supposed to halt Ottoman expansion, but that had instead been annihilated in a single night. The deaths of King Vukašin and Despot Uglješa created a succession crisis in Serbian territories, as various nobles and claimants competed for the positions and lands that the fallen commanders had controlled, initiating political conflicts that further weakened Serbian capacity to resist Ottoman pressure. The young emperor Urash, the weak, nominal ruler of the Serbian Empire but lacking the military capability or political authority that Vukašin had provided, found his position even more precarious after Maritsa, as the fragmented Serbian nobility increasingly pursued independent policies without reference to imperial authority that had become essentially meaningless. The political fragmentation that accelerated following Maritsa transformed the Serbian Empire from a unified state capable of organizing massive military expeditions into a collection of competing principalities whose mutual rivalries prevented effective coordination against the Ottoman threat. The strategic transformation that the Battle of Maritsa accomplished in the balance of power throughout the southern Balkans became apparent within months as Ottoman forces advanced into territories that the destroyed Serbian army could no longer defend, and as Christian rulers throughout the region recognized that accommodation with Ottoman power offered better survival prospects than continued resistance. Sultan Murad moved quickly to exploit the victory, sending Ottoman forces into Macedonia and southern Serbian territories that had previously remained beyond Turkish control, meeting minimal resistance from populations and local leaders who understood that the military capacity to contest Ottoman expansion had been destroyed at Maritsa. The vassal relationships that various Serbian, Bulgarian, and other Balkan Christian rulers established with the Ottoman Empire following Maritsa reflected pragmatic calculation that accepting Turkish suzerainty and paying tribute offered better terms than continued resistance that would inevitably result in military defeat and potentially in complete loss of autonomy. The vassal system that emerged from Maritsa's aftermath would characterize Ottoman Balkan Christian relations for the following decades, creating a political structure that enabled Ottoman expansion with minimal military resistance, while allowing Christian nobles to maintain their positions under Turkish overlordship. The military lessons that Ottoman commanders and the broader Ottoman military establishment derived from the Battle of Maritsa reinforced the effectiveness of bold, unconventional tactics that exploited enemy vulnerabilities rather than relying solely on numerical superiority or conventional battlefield formations. The spectacular success of the nighttime assault validated tactical innovation and aggressive action even when facing numerically superior opponents, encouraging Ottoman military culture to continue developing sophisticated operational approaches rather than falling into doctrinal rigidity that might have resulted from previous successes. The battle demonstrated the decisive importance of intelligence gathering and reconnaissance that could identify enemy vulnerabilities, of disciplined execution that enabled complex operations to succeed despite darkness and confusion, and of leadership that could conceive daring plans and inspire warriors to execute them despite obvious risks. These lessons, absorbed into Ottoman military institutional knowledge through the experience of commanders and warriors who participated in the battle, contributed to the continuing evolution of Ottoman military capabilities that would make Turkish forces increasingly formidable in subsequent campaigns throughout the Balkans and beyond. The psychological impact of Maritsa on both Ottoman and Christian populations created narratives and collective memories that shaped how each group understood their own identity and historical trajectory. Ottoman culture incorporated Maritsa into triumphalist narratives, celebrating the empire's expansion and Sultan Murad's military genius, viewing the battle as validation of Ottoman power and as evidence of divine favor supporting Muslim conquest of Christian territories. The battle reinforced Ottoman confidence and sense of historical destiny, encouraging continued expansion and creating cultural expectations that Ottoman military operations would consistently achieve success, regardless of apparent obstacles. Christian populations throughout the Balkans, particularly Serbians whose military power had been so catastrophically destroyed, developed narratives that attempted to preserve dignity and hope despite the military disaster, sometimes emphasizing Serbian courage and sacrifice while attributing defeat to circumstances beyond warriors' control, other times searching for religious or moral explanations that might make sense of the catastrophe without requiring acknowledgement that Ottoman military superiority had been the decisive factor. The human suffering that the Battle of Maritsa inflicted extended far beyond the warriors who died in the fighting or the pursuit, affecting families who lost fathers, sons, and brothers in the disaster, communities that lost significant portions of their male populations, and the broader Serbian society that confronted the psychological and material consequences of comprehensive military defeat. The widows and orphans created by Maritsa numbered in the tens of thousands, as the enormous army that perished represented a significant proportion of the Serbian military-age male population whose deaths created a demographic shock that would affect Serbian society for decades. The economic impact of losing so many productive members of society, combined with the tribute obligations that Ottoman vassalage imposed on Serbian territories, created hardship and poverty that compounded the psychological trauma of military defeat. These human dimensions of the battle's consequences, though they received less attention in historical narratives focused on political and military outcomes, nonetheless represented profound suffering that affected countless individuals whose lives were permanently altered by the events of that catastrophic night along the Maritsa River. 1371 through 1375 witnessed the full revelation of how completely the Battle of Maritsa had transformed the strategic landscape throughout the Balkans, as Sultan Murad I systematically exploited the victory to extend Ottoman control over territories that had previously remained independent or under nominal Byzantine suzerainty, but that the destruction of Serbian military power had left defenseless against Turkish expansion. The military vacuum that Maritsa created in Macedonia and southern Serbia enabled Ottoman forces to advance rapidly with minimal resistance, establishing administrative control and military garrisons throughout regions where Christian populations had no choice but to accept Ottoman governance or face conquest under less favorable terms than negotiated submission would provide. The speed and completeness of Ottoman expansion following Maritsa demonstrated that the battle's significance extended far beyond the tactical victory achieved through the night attack, encompassing a strategic transformation that altered the entire regional power balance and that established patterns of Ottoman dominance that would persist for centuries. The Macedonian territories that fell under Ottoman control in the immediate aftermath of Maritsa represented some of the wealthiest and most strategically important lands in the Balkans, providing the expanding Ottoman Empire with agricultural resources, urban commercial centers, and geographic positions that would facilitate further expansion into the Serbian heartland and toward the Adriatic coast. The cities of Sars, Drama, Kavala, and numerous other Macedonian urban centers accepted Ottoman authority within months of the Maritsa catastrophe, their leaders recognizing that resistance without the military forces that had been destroyed at the battle would result only in unnecessary bloodshed and destruction. The administrative integration of these territories into the Ottoman provincial system followed established patterns that had proven effective in previously conquered regions, combining military governance that ensured security and Ottoman authority with pragmatic tolerance for local customs and religious practices that reduced resistance and enabled relatively smooth transitions from Christian to Ottoman rule. The economic productivity of these newly acquired territories, maintained and even enhanced by the security that effective Ottoman governance provided, generated tax revenues that funded further military operations while also creating prosperity that made Ottoman rule acceptable or even preferable to the political instability and warfare that had characterized the region during the final decades of Byzantine and Serbian authority. The Serbian principalities that survived Maritsa as independent entities faced stark choices between accepting Ottoman vassalage on terms that Sultan Murad dictated or risking military conquest that would eliminate even the limited autonomy that vassal status preserved. The Serbian prince Lazar Frabiljanović, who had not participated in the Maritsa campaign and whose forces remained intact while much of Serbian military capacity lay dead along the Maritsa River, emerged as the most powerful Christian ruler in Serbian territories, but recognized that his position depended on Ottoman forbearance rather than on his own military capability to resist Turkish pressure. Lazar negotiated vassal arrangements with Sultan Murad that required annual tribute payments and military support for Ottoman campaigns in exchange for Ottoman recognition of his authority over his territories and protection against other threats. This pragmatic accommodation enabled Lazar to preserve his principality for another 18 years, until his own death at the Battle of Kosovo in 1389, demonstrating both the benefits of accepting Ottoman suzerainty and the ultimate reality that such arrangements represented temporary expedients rather than permanent solutions to the Ottoman challenge. The Bulgarian territories that had provided contingents to the destroyed army at Maritsa found their own strategic position fundamentally compromised by the battle's outcome. As the demonstration of Ottoman military superiority and the elimination of Serbian military power that might have supported Bulgarian resistance left the fragmented Bulgarian principalities with no realistic option beyond accepting Turkish vassalage. The Bulgarian Tsar Ivan Shishman, ruling a territory already reduced from the extensive Bulgarian Empire that his predecessors had governed, accepted Ottoman suzerainty following Maritsa and agreed to tribute payments and military support obligations similar to those imposed on Serbian vassals. The northeastern Bulgarian territories ruled by Dobrotica, nominally independent but recognizing that Ottoman power made continued autonomy dependent on Turkish strategic calculations rather than on Bulgarian military capability, similarly accepted vassal status that acknowledged Ottoman dominance. The pattern that emerged throughout the Balkans following Maritsa saw Christian rulers accepting varying degrees of Ottoman suzerainty, preserving nominal independence and local governance authority while acknowledging Turkish overlordship and providing the tribute and military support that Ottoman strategic interests demanded. The Byzantine Empire's response to the dramatic shift in regional power balance that Maritsa accomplished reflected the terminal decline that characterized the empire's final decades. As Emperor John V Palaeologos recognized that Byzantine survival depended entirely on Ottoman strategic decisions rather than on any Byzantine military capability to defend the empire's remaining territories. The emperor, who had already accepted a form of vassal status acknowledging Ottoman dominance, found his position further weakened by Maritsa's demonstration that no Christian military force in the region could effectively challenge Ottoman power. The Byzantine territories that remained under imperial control, essentially limited to Constantinople and its immediate environs, along with scattered possessions elsewhere, survived because Sultan Murad calculated that maintaining the Byzantine Empire as a client state served Ottoman interest better than the immediate conquest of Constantinople that might provoke a unified Christian European response. This strategic forbearance would continue for another 8 decades, until Sultan Mehmed II finally conquered Constantinople in 1453, completing the Ottoman absorption of Byzantine territories that had begun with the first Turkish crossings into Europe nearly a century earlier. The diplomatic revolution that Maritsa precipitated in relationships between the Ottoman Empire and various European Christian powers reflected recognition throughout Europe that Ottoman expansion had created a new regional superpower whose military capabilities exceeded those of any single Christian state, and that could be contained, if at all, only through coordinated multi-state efforts that European political realities made extremely difficult to organize. The Hungarian kingdom, occupying territories north of the Ottoman-dominated Balkans and representing the most powerful Christian state in the region, confronted the reality that Ottoman advance into Serbian and Bulgarian territories brought Turkish forces to Hungary's southern frontier, creating security threats that would shape Hungarian strategic policy for the remainder of the Ottoman Empire's existence. The Hungarian response combined rhetorical commitment to defending Christendom against Turkish expansion with pragmatic recognition that Hungary lacked the military capacity to reverse Ottoman conquest without substantial support from other European powers, which proved perpetually difficult to obtain. The pattern of requesting, organizing, and ultimately failing to sustain effective crusading coalitions against Ottoman power that characterized Hungarian policy throughout the late 14th and 15th centuries reflected both genuine strategic concerns about Ottoman expansion and the fundamental reality that European political fragmentation prevented the kind of sustained, coordinated military efforts that might have successfully contested Turkish dominance in the Balkans. The Italian maritime republics adjusted their commercial and diplomatic policies toward the Ottoman Empire in light of Maritsa's demonstration that Turkish power had become the dominant political force in the Eastern Mediterranean and that successful commerce in the region required accommodation with Ottoman authority. Venice and Genoa, whose commercial empires depended on stable relationships with political authorities controlling key ports and trade routes, negotiated commercial treaties with Sultan Murad that guaranteed Italian merchants access to Ottoman territories in exchange for recognition of Turkish political authority and for restraint from supporting anti-Ottoman military coalitions. These pragmatic commercial arrangements, prioritizing economic interests over religious solidarity with Christian Balkan populations suffering under Ottoman expansion, established patterns of Italian-Ottoman relations that would persist throughout the Ottoman Empire's existence and that demonstrated how political and economic realities consistently trumped religious ideologies in determining international relations. The papacy's response to Maritsa and the broader pattern of Ottoman expansion that the battle facilitated combined genuine alarm about the Muslim conquest of Christian territories with the practical inability to organize an effective military response that might reverse Turkish gains. Pope Gregory XI and his successors issued numerous calls for crusading expeditions to defend Christendom against the Ottoman threat, offering spiritual rewards and attempting to broker diplomatic agreements that might unite Christian powers in a common cause against the Turks. Yet these papal initiatives consistently failed to produce sustained military efforts comparable to the major crusades of earlier centuries, as European political fragmentation, competing national interests, and the sheer difficulty of organizing and sustaining military operations at such distances from Western European power bases prevented effective action despite recurring crises that demonstrated the urgency of the Ottoman challenge. The failure of crusading ideology to produce an effective military response to Ottoman expansion following Maritsa foreshadowed the broader pattern, where rhetorical commitment to defending Christendom proved insufficient to overcome the practical obstacles that prevented coordinated European military action against an increasingly powerful Ottoman Empire. The Battle of Maritsa's enduring significance in military history extends beyond its immediate strategic consequences to encompass the tactical and operational lessons that the engagement demonstrated about nighttime operations, surprise attacks, and the psychological dimensions of warfare that can enable inferior forces to defeat superior opponents through superior planning and execution. The night attack that Sultan Murad's forces executed at Maritsa represented sophisticated military planning that required detailed intelligence about enemy positions and vulnerabilities, careful coordination of multiple assault columns attacking simultaneously from different directions, and disciplined execution by warriors capable of maintaining formation cohesion and following tactical plans despite darkness and confusion. The success of this complex operation demonstrated that Ottoman military capabilities had evolved far beyond the relatively simple tactical approaches that characterized earlier Turkish warfare, reflecting institutional military development that created reproducible operational competencies, rather than relying solely on individual commanders' genius or warriors' courage. The intelligence gathering that preceded the Ottoman attack proved crucial to the operation's success, providing commanders with detailed information about Serbian camp layout, defensive preparations, and the dangerous complacency that characterized security practices within the massive army. Ottoman reconnaissance efforts identified the specific weaknesses in Serbian defensive positions that could be exploited through surprise attack, noted the locations where Serbian forces were concentrated or dispersed, and assessed the terrain features that would affect nighttime troop movements and combat operations. The systematic intelligence collection that Ottoman forces conducted, combining information from scouts observing the Serbian camp directly, with reports from spies who might have infiltrated Serbian positions or gathered information from local populations, demonstrated sophisticated intelligence capabilities that many contemporary military forces lacked. The tactical planning that Ottoman commanders developed based on this intelligence showed how information superiority could guide operational decisions that maximize friendly advantages while then extremised, exploiting enemy vulnerabilities. The coordination challenges that nighttime military operations inherently present were overcome through careful planning that assigned specific objectives to each assault column, established recognition signals that would enable Ottoman warriors to distinguish friends from enemies in darkness, and created contingency procedures for adapting to unexpected battlefield developments. The Ottoman forces attacking the Serbian camp maintained remarkable cohesion despite operating in darkness across unfamiliar terrain while conducting violent combat operations, demonstrating the training and discipline that distinguish professional military forces from improvised levies. The ability to execute synchronized attacks from multiple directions simultaneously, creating the overwhelming shock that shattered Serbian cohesion before organized resistance could develop, required not only careful planning, but also precise timing and communication that tested organizational capabilities even for a sophisticated military establishment like the Ottoman army. The success of these complex coordination efforts validated the training programs and organizational structures that Ottoman military institutions had developed and demonstrated that systematic preparation could enable forces to execute extraordinarily difficult operations successfully. The psychological dimensions of the Maritsa attack proved as important as physical combat in determining the engagement's outcome, as the complete surprise achieved by Ottoman forces created panic and confusion that prevented Serbian warriors from employing their superior numbers effectively. The psychological shock of a sudden violent attack in darkness against an army that had expected no serious threat generated terror that overcame rational military responses, transforming organized military units into frightened individuals seeking personal survival rather than collective defense. The psychological impact was amplified by the multiple simultaneous attacks from different directions that created a perception of being surrounded by enemies of unknown strength, by the fires that illuminated horrific scenes while also suggesting the camp's complete compromise, and by the absence of clear command direction as Serbian leaders struggled to comprehend what was happening and to organize an effective response. The Ottoman exploitation of psychological factors demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of how fear and confusion could serve as force multipliers that enabled inferior numbers to overcome superior forces when the psychological preparation and cohesion of the two armies differed dramatically. The pursuit tactics that Ottoman forces employed following the Serbian camp's collapse demonstrated how thoroughly planning had anticipated the likely course of the battle and how effectively the victory could be exploited through systematic hunting of fleeing enemies. The Ottoman cavalry that pursued Serbian survivors had been briefed on likely escape routes and crossing points where fleeing warriors would concentrate. enabling Turkish forces to position themselves to maximize casualties inflicted during the pursuit phase that historically produced disproportionate losses for defeated armies. The systematic nature of the pursuit, continuing for hours after the main battle concluded and ranging across extensive territory to hunt down scattered survivors, reflected a doctrine that understood pursuit for transforming tactical victory into strategic triumph through comprehensive destruction of enemy military capability. The effectiveness of Ottoman pursuit operations at Maritsa established patterns that would characterize Turkish military operations in subsequent campaigns, as commanders recognized that battles won but not thoroughly exploited through aggressive pursuit left defeated enemies capable of reorganizing and continuing resistance. The defensive failures that enabled the Serbian catastrophe at Maritsa provide cautionary lessons about security practices that remain relevant across military history, demonstrating how complacency and inadequate vigilance can enable sophisticated enemies to achieve devastating surprise attacks regardless of the victim force's numerical strength or theoretical capabilities. The Serbian army's failure to maintain adequate camp security, to establish effective early warning systems that might have detected approaching Ottoman forces, and to maintain combat readiness despite operating deep in hostile territory, created the vulnerabilities that Ottoman tactical planning exploited so effectively. The dangerous assumption that superior numbers provided security without requiring systematic defensive measures proved catastrophically wrong when facing an enemy whose tactical sophistication enabled it to negate numerical advantages through surprise and superior planning. The Serbian commander's apparent underestimation of Ottoman capabilities, leading to security practices appropriate for facing disorganized raiders rather than a professional military force capable of executing complex nighttime operations, represented intelligence failure as much as tactical error. The comparative analysis of Maritsa alongside other significant medieval battles reveals both common patterns that characterize successful medieval warfare and unique features that distinguish this engagement from other famous encounters. Like many decisive medieval battles, Maritsa demonstrated the importance of leadership, planning, and tactical innovation rather than simple numerical superiority or superior technology, showing that medieval warfare rewarded intelligence and creativity as much as brute force. Yet Maritsa was unusual in the comprehensiveness of the victory achieved and in how thoroughly one side was destroyed while the other suffered minimal casualties, creating casualty ratios that exceeded most medieval engagements where victorious armies typically suffered substantial losses even in successful battles. The night attack approach that produced this asymmetric outcome, though not unprecedented in medieval warfare, was employed in Maritsa with sophistication and scale that made it exceptionally effective, and it demonstrated how unconventional tactics could achieve results that conventional battlefield confrontations could not match. The lessons that military historians and theorists have derived from studying the Battle of Maritsa encompass insights about surprise, about nighttime operations, about the psychological dimensions of combat, and about how superior planning and execution can overcome numerical inferiority. The battle validates the principle that information superiority and intelligence gathering can provide decisive advantages by revealing vulnerabilities that tactical planning can exploit, demonstrating that understanding the enemy sometimes matters more than matching their numbers or equipment. The engagement illustrates how psychological factors, including surprise, fear, and confusion, can serve as force multipliers that amplify physical combat effects and that can disable numerically superior forces if their psychological cohesion breaks under unexpected pressure. Perhaps most fundamentally, Maritsa demonstrates that warfare is fundamentally about human organizations competing against each other, and that the organization with superior planning, preparation, training, and leadership can defeat larger but less well-organized opponents through systematic exploitation of weaknesses that inadequate preparation creates. The Battle of Maritsa's enduring place in Serbian, Ottoman, and broader Balkan historical consciousness reflects how the engagement's dramatic character and consequential outcomes made it a touchstone for understanding the broader historical transformation, through which Ottoman power supplanted Christian authority throughout southeastern Europe during the 14th and 15th centuries. The battle acquired mythological dimensions in various cultural traditions, with narratives emphasizing different aspects of the encounter depending on whether the storytellers identified with the victorious Ottoman forces or the destroyed Serbian army, creating competing historical memories that served different political and ideological purposes across the centuries. The Serbian cultural memory of Maritsa incorporated the battle into tragic narratives about heroic resistance against overwhelming odds and about the catastrophic consequences of disunity and poor leadership, creating cautionary tales that Serbian national consciousness would draw upon during subsequent periods of crisis and foreign domination. The Ottoman historical tradition celebrated Maritsa as a demonstration of Sultan Murad's military genius and as validation of Ottoman expansion as a divinely favored enterprise, incorporating the victory into triumphalist narratives that legitimized Turkish rule over conquered Christian populations. The historiographical evolution in scholarly treatment of the Battle of Maritsa demonstrates how changing historical methodologies and perspectives have produced increasingly sophisticated understandings of the engagement's causes, conduct, and consequences. Early chronicles, composed in both Christian and Muslim cultural contexts, provided accounts shaped heavily by propaganda purposes and by limited understanding of military operations, often exaggerating or minimizing various aspects of the battle to serve narrative purposes that transcended accurate historical record. The 19th century nationalist historiography that emerged throughout the Balkans incorporated Maritsa into national historical narratives that emphasized ethnic identity and religious conflict, sometimes distorting the battle's historical realities to serve contemporary political agendas promoting national consciousness and independence movements. Modern academic historians, working with more comprehensive source bases and employing methodological approaches emphasizing critical source analysis and comparative study, have developed more nuanced understandings that acknowledge both the battle's genuine military significance and the complex political, social, and economic factors that shaped its context and consequences. The geographic legacy of Maritsa proved difficult to preserve, precisely given the battle's nighttime character that left limited physical evidence, and given subsequent centuries of development that transformed the landscape where the engagement occurred. The Maritsa River Valley, where the catastrophic Serbian defeat unfolded, has been identified with reasonable confidence based on chronicle descriptions and analysis of terrain features, though the exact locations of the Serbian camp and the specific routes that Ottoman assault columns followed remain subjects of some historical debate. The absence of dramatic battlefield monuments or preserved sites makes Maritsa less accessible to historical tourism than some other significant medieval battles, though this absence also reflects the battle's character as a nighttime assault that left less concentrated physical evidence than daylight engagements where fighting occurred in more limited areas. Archaeological investigation of potential battlefield sites has yielded limited results, as the difficulty of locating and identifying artifacts from a specific 14th century battle amid centuries of subsequent human activity makes definitive archaeological confirmation of traditional battlefield locations extremely challenging. The cultural narratives that emerged from Maritsa and Serbian tradition incorporated the battle into broader tragic themes about Serbian medieval glory destroyed by Ottoman conquest, creating folk songs, epic poetry, and historical narratives that mourned the catastrophic defeat while celebrating the courage of warriors who fought in hopeless circumstances. The deaths of King Vukašin and Despot Uglješa became subjects of numerous folk songs that portrayed the brothers as tragic heroes, whose deaths symbolized the destruction of Serbian independence and the beginning of centuries of Ottoman domination. These cultural narratives, transmitted orally across generations and eventually recorded in written collections during the 19th century, served important functions in preserving Serbian national identity and historical consciousness during periods of foreign rule, keeping alive memories of medieval Serbian independence that would inspire later nationalist movements seeking to restore Serbian sovereignty. The historical accuracy of these folk narratives varied considerably, as oral transmission inevitably altered details and as storytellers shaped accounts to serve cultural and political purposes that sometimes conflicted with accurate historical record. Yet the narrative's cultural significance transcended their historical precision. The comparative significance of Maritsa relative to other battles in Ottoman expansion reveals that while the engagement was decisively important in establishing Ottoman dominance in the southern Balkans, it represented one component in the larger pattern of Ottoman military success that characterized the 14th and 15th centuries. The Battle of Kosovo in 1389, where Sultan Murad himself was killed despite Ottoman victory, acquired greater prominence in both Ottoman and Serbian historical consciousness, partly because of the dramatic circumstances of the Sultan's assassination and partly because Kosovo more directly confronted Serbian core territories in ways that made the battle more central to Serbian national narratives. The later Ottoman victories at Nicopolis in 1396 and Varna in 1444 demonstrated Ottoman capacity to defeat major crusading expeditions organized by Western European powers, establishing Turkish military reputation beyond the Balkans and showing that Ottoman expansion threatened Christian Europe more broadly. Yet Maritsa remained significant as the engagement that destroyed the largest Christian Balkan army assembled in the 14th century, and that opened Macedonia and southern Serbian territories to Ottoman conquest, making it a crucial stepping stone in the broader Ottoman expansion process. The counterfactual historical speculation about what might have occurred if the Serbian army had not been destroyed at Maritsa, though inevitably speculative, nonetheless illuminates the battle's historical significance by considering how different outcomes might have altered subsequent developments. A Serbian victory at Maritsa, or even a more limited Serbian defeat that preserved significant military capability, might have enabled continued Christian resistance to Ottoman expansion in the southern Balkans, and might have delayed or prevented Turkish conquest of Macedonian and southern Serbian territories. Such an outcome might have encouraged other Christian powers to commit greater resources to resisting Ottoman expansion, potentially creating a more effective anti-Ottoman coalition than the fragmented resistance efforts that characterized actual historical developments. Yet the fundamental trajectory of Ottoman expansion, driven by sophisticated military capabilities, effective governance institutions, and the political fragmentation that prevented effective Christian coordination, probably would have continued even if Maritsa had produced different outcomes, suggesting that the battle accelerated Ottoman dominance rather than fundamentally causing it. The lessons that Maritsa offers for understanding medieval Balkan history and the broader dynamics of Ottoman expansion encompass insights about the relationship between military capabilities and political outcomes, about how tactical innovations can produce strategic transformations, and about the complex interactions between religious identity, ethnic consciousness, and political organization that shaped the region's historical development. The battle demonstrates that Ottoman success resulted not from technological superiority or from simple numerical advantages, but rather from institutional military development that created sophisticated operational capabilities and from political structures that enabled more effective resource mobilization than the fragmented Christian states could achieve. The engagement illustrates how individual battles, however decisive in immediate military terms, acquire their ultimate historical significance through the political and strategic consequences that flow from military outcomes rather than from the tactical results themselves. Perhaps most fundamentally, Maritsa exemplifies how the study of military history must incorporate understanding of the broader political, social, and economic context within which military operations occur and through which tactical outcomes become historically consequential. The human legacy of the Battle of Maritsa encompasses not only the thousands who died along the Maritsa River on that catastrophic night, but also the countless individuals whose lives were fundamentally altered by the battle's strategic consequences as Ottoman expansion transformed the political organization and social structures throughout the southern Balkans. The widows and orphans created by the battle faced lives of hardship and uncertainty, deprived of the family members whose labor and protection had provided security and economic support. The communities that lost significant portions of their male populations in the disaster confronted demographic and economic challenges that affected their development for generations. The broader populations throughout Macedonia and Serbian territories who came under Ottoman governance following Maritsa experienced the complex realities of living under foreign Muslim rule that combined elements of tolerance and opportunity with subordination and cultural pressure. These human dimensions of Maritsa's legacy, though they left fewer traces and historical records than the battle's military and political consequences, nonetheless represented profound transformations in countless individual lives and in the collective experiences of communities throughout the region. The ultimate assessment of the Battle of Maritsa's historical significance must acknowledge that the engagement represented a crucial moment in the larger process through which the Ottoman Empire established itself as the dominant power in southeastern Europe, and through which medieval Christian political structures gave way to centuries of Turkish rule that would fundamentally reshape the region's religious, cultural, and political landscape. Maritsa was not the beginning of Ottoman expansion into Europe, as Turkish forces had crossed into Europe decades earlier, nor was it the end, as Ottoman expansion would continue for over a century after the battle. Yet Maritsa was the moment when the possibility of effective Christian military resistance to Ottoman dominance in the southern Balkans was destroyed, when the fragmented Serbian state lost its capacity to organize serious opposition to Turkish expansion, and when accommodation with Ottoman power became the only realistic option for Christian rulers seeking to preserve even limited autonomy. The battle's significance thus lies not in any single dramatic event or heroic action, but rather in its catalytic role in accelerating historical processes that were already underway and in eliminating alternatives that might have produced different historical trajectories. Sultan Murad I's victory at Maritsa in 1371 stands as one of the decisive engagements in Balkan medieval history, a battle whose consequences shaped the region's development for centuries and whose legacy continues informing how Balkan peoples understand their own histories and identities.